Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to my second attempt at filming a video where we attempt to predict questions that may be on the VCAA end of year exam. We had a lot of success with this last year, where on one of the videos that we did like this, we predicted the 5-mark evaluate monetary policy question, which one student afterwards told me they were very excited by because they felt very much prepared for it. So what we're going to try and do is, based on a few different factors, which we'll talk about on the next slide, predict what could be coming up on the end of year exam, and then look at some sample questions of how that may come up, and then where the mark allocation would go on those kind of questions. So let's not waste any time, let's get straight into it. So some things to consider when predicting questions for the end of year exam. So what has or hasn't been asked about in the last few exams? Today we're going to focus on a very specific example of what hasn't been asked, which last year there was a whole portion of Unit 4 Area Study 2 that was cut out. So that's what we're going to focus on today, and then in future videos we might look at some other things that haven't been asked before or haven't ever been asked in the study design. Other things we'll bring into other videos is of what's been asked, what hasn't been done well, because things that haven't been done well, VCAA likes to ask about again in future exams. And then also what was looming large in the economy when it was written. So the exam's finalized in about May of each year. So often it's informed by all the things happening in the economy up to May of that year. Anything after that won't be considered in the exam. So all these current lockdowns weren't really taken into account when they wrote the exam. And it's already been printed by all the times that the world's gone to this dumpster fire that we currently live in. So what's happening in the economy around May really might inform the kind of questions that they're asking. So we're going to go straight into what we're looking at today, which is what hasn't been asked, which is a large chunk of Unit 4 Area Study 2, Aggregate Supply Side Policies, which was removed in 2020, those lucky jerks, because you've gone through probably a worse year than they have, and they got to have a little bit of their content cut out, and their exams pushed back. So they got helped out twice, and you got helped out none. So we're going to look at welfare and tax reform. Nice and easy, a lot of examples that come up with that are really relevant. Immigration policy and how I think that might come up this year. And strengths and weaknesses of AS policies, which is weird that they took it out last year because so much of that is tied in with each of the policies in aggregate supply side policies. So we'll look at that, and we're going to look at it in relation to research and development grants and tying it into a goal. So we're going to look at 2 3-mark questions and then a 4-marker. These 2 3-mark ones are just how whatever has been impacted on aggregate supply. So we're going to look at this one. Explain how one recent tax or welfare reform, so given the option there, you can choose one or the other, has been used to impact on Australia's aggregate supply. In this case, just used to impact. It could be positive or negative. We're going to focus on positives, but obviously you could go either way. And so we're going to break this down into a 3-mark question where the marks are going to be coming from. So the first one's going to be from describing tax or welfare reform. Saying what it is, so tax reform being any changes to the rate of tax paid by households or businesses, and welfare reform being any changes to the welfare system, the amount or rate that's paid towards people who are unemployed or disadvantaged. So you're going to get 1 mark for that. Then you're going to get 1 mark for your recent example and tying that to aggregate supply. So recent example, basically a recent example and what it does. So there's going to be many different recent examples for it. We'll talk about 3 ones real quickly. So if we want to go with tax reform, 2 quick examples of the low and middle income tax offset and the business tax cut to 25%. And if you want to go welfare reform, the easiest one is job seeker, reverting back to essentially close to its original rate. So if we look at each of these, what's important to say is the overall impact of them. So the low and middle income tax offset, what that does is motivates employees because now they're earning more. And therefore that increases productivity. Business tax lowers businesses' cost of production and therefore leads to them wanting to expand, which will then hopefully lead to increases in productive capacity. And then job seeker reverting motivates people to return to labor force. So, which increases our productivity or once they get jobs. And then your final one is going to be for saying the overall impact on aggregate supply, which is that it increases aggregate supply overall. So that's some examples for recent tax or welfare reform. Then we're going to move on to outlining how recent events regarding immigration policy. So recent events, meaning last 2 years, around immigration policy may impact on our aggregate supply. So 3 marks again. First up, you're going to be describing immigration policy. So you're going to be talking about the flow of human capital between nations. You're going to talk about the fact that there is skilled, family, and special, or humanitarian. So you talk about that. Then you're going to have to talk about those recent changes. And what's important about that is that there's been net zero migration, or as close to it as possible, in 2020. So in 2020, because of closed borders, we did not have the skilled migration coming in that we normally would have. And normally we use skilled migration to fill skill shortages we can't fill internally. So it's going to leave us with skill shortages and productive bottlenecks. And that obviously then, for the final point, that limits or decreases aggregate supply. And so that would be that. So just because we have limited skilled migration coming in because of the border closures because of COVID, that means it's going to be leaving the country with skill shortages and productive bottlenecks, which reduces our productive capacity and therefore limits our overall ability to increase aggregate supply or decreases it overall. And then for our final question, we have discussed the use of research and development grants on the achievement of the goal of low inflation. So we've got discuss, very, very important when we've got discuss here, and the achievement of a goal, so the goal of low inflation. So a few things we already want to do in there before we even look at the marks. So with the discuss question, you're going to be looking at strengths and weaknesses, or positives and negatives. You're obviously going to want to describe R&D, and you're going to want to define the goal at some point and the achievement of it. So whether it's more or less likely to be achieved. So you talk about research and development grants. So first up, you're going to describe those. Which is incentives from the government provided to businesses to conduct research and development spending, aiming to either improve production techniques, discover new technology, etc. So then you're going to get into how I'd like to do this and how I recommend you do this is with a question like this. Basically, treat it like there's 1.5 marks for the advantage, so for positive or strength, and 1.5 for the negative or weakness, but with each of those tying it to the goal of low inflation. So a positive being that it may lead to breakthroughs in productivity, so it may lead to new production techniques which are going to increase productivity, which means more output per unit of input, which means there's going to be increased aggregate supply and also lower cost of production. If there's lower cost of production, that's going to ease cost inflationary pressures. And mean that the goal of low inflation is more likely to be achieved. So a lot of times when I talk about this, people then go into the fact of, well, on average, inflation's been below the goal. So if we ease cost inflationary pressures, that means we're just going to be even further below the goal. And more just means that inflation won't get out of hand. So ease inflationary pressures and make it easier to achieve the goal of low inflation. And that's normally on that first one is where I define the goal as well. Just go in brackets afterwards. The general level of prices increasing 2 to 3% on average over time. And that should cover it very, very nicely. Whereas for the negative, you always talk about with R&D grants because they may lead to productive advances. There's no guaranteed benefit. And if there's no guaranteed benefit, that means that time and resources could be put towards research and development that don't actually lead to any benefit overall. And therefore, it shouldn't, although it still will increase the cost of production for businesses because governments don't cover the full cost of it. And so therefore, it could lead to an increase in cost of production as there's still time and money spent on it and those resources could have been used elsewhere. They're not as productive. And therefore, that could lead to an increase in cost inflationary pressures. And then you'd link that to the goal of low inflation. So at the moment, it would make us trend towards the goal, but realistically, it would make it harder to achieve the goal of low inflation if they got out of hand. So just looking at that strength and weakness, tying it back in with the goal overall. And that's it for this first part. So it's about 11 minutes of fun of predicting what's going to come in the future in terms of Unit 4 Area Study 2. If you have any ideas of things that you would like to be questions predicted about, if there's anything you think that might be, that you'd like there to be a mark allocation for, and some suggestions of how you should answer that, hit me up, either comment below or email me on sean@therunningeconomy.com. If you have any other ideas of videos you would like to see, also let me know. I'm more than happy to try and do it. I'm more than happy to try and make everyone do as well in the exam as possible. And that, I hope you are having a wonderful day and your exam preparation is going well, and I will see you soon.